morning, everybody. It is September 11th, 2025. Starting the show a little bit different this morning. Yesterday, a incredible patriot of our country was assassinated, Charlie Kirk. And it kind of feels a little bit like it did on September 11th, 2001, when I woke up this morning. And, oddly enough, today is September 11th, and we're talking about the September 11th attack, the global war on terror, or the GWOT, and Benghazi, which was 13 years ago today. I just want to say that, our family, and as many of you, many others like our family, this hit a little home. It hit a little personal. We kept our kids home today to spend time with us. I hope that you took time to do the same thing. Just be with those that you love, and our hearts go out to the Kirk family, to those that are still working within the space of freedom and protecting this wonderful constitutional republic. And our prayers, I know, thoughts and prayers, if you don't think they work, shut the hell up. This isn't a show for you. But our prayers have been over the protection of those that are still fighting and his family. So today, September 11th, 2025, it's on with the show.
When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands that
sailors and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force.
Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the founding fathers. Not one small step for man.
Those three hallowed words reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be.
we pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
Good morning. Like I said just a little bit ago, today we're talking about September 11th, 2001, the global war on terror, as those of us who served know it as GWOT and Benghazi. So for an entire generation of Americans, these just weren't moments in history books, right? They were lived experiences, scars, constant reminders that the world changed that day, very much like what it felt like yesterday. If you were alive on September 11th, 2001, which I was serving in the military at the time, you remember exactly where you were when you heard it. I just dropped my ex-wife, Crystal, off at work. I was listening to the morning radio show from Portland. The host, it's usually a really, really fun show, started crying, didn't really understand what was going on until I got into the office at the mill dep, saw what was going on, and we knew we were at war. Everything changed that day. You remember watching the Twin Towers fall. You remember the Pentagon burning. You remember the shock of hearing that fourth plane went down in Pennsylvania field because the passengers refused to let it reach the target. And that single morning shattered the idea that America was untouchable. But 9/11 just wasn't an attack. It was the starting gun for the global war on terror, or the GWOT. 20 years of deployments, 2 major wars, dozens of smaller operations, thousands of Americans lost their lives, and millions of others were forever changed. It was a war. It was a war without a single battlefield. A war where the enemies didn't wear uniforms and where the front line couldn't be truly defined, right? And then 11 years later, another tragedy struck in Benghazi, Libya. A small group of Americans found themselves under siege. They fought hour after hour with no guarantee that any help would come. They fought for 13 hours. And if you haven't read the book or you haven't seen the movie, highly recommend it. The book follows pretty closely the movie. I actually had the opportunity last night to meet Mark Oz Geist, who is the co-author of 13 Hours. Really, really kind gentleman. Yeah, and hopefully we're going to have him on the show. We talked to him about it. We're going to get a hold of him, see what we can do. But 4 of those guys didn't make it out. So, this episode isn't about conspiracy theories. It's not about tinfoil hats. It's just a brutal, complicated, and often frustrating reality of what happened and why it still matters today. So, let's talk about 9/11, the day that changed everything. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, 19 cowards, or Al Qaeda scumbags, hijacked 4 commercial airliners. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 slammed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. At 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 tore into the South Tower. Excuse me, I had coffee this morning. Still drinking coffee. At 9:37 a.m., American Flight 77 struck the Pentagon. And at 10:03 a.m., United's Flight 93 crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, after passengers revolted against the hijackers. In less than 2 hours, the unthinkable had happened. Both towers of the World Trade Center collapsed. Nearly 3,000 people were killed. Office workers, airline passengers, firefighters, paramedics, police officers, military personnel. It was the deadliest attack on American soil since Pearl Harbor. Images of that day, people jumping from burning skyscrapers, first responders running into the smoke, the towers collapsing into dust, seared themselves into history. America had been attacked not by a nation, but by an extremist network. Really similar to yesterday. Charlie Kirk was not killed by some random person. It was killed by a gender ideology lunatic. The message was simple and it was brutal. Back then, you're not safe in your homeland. But the response was just as clear. America would not take it lying down. By that evening, President George W. Bush told the nation, "We will make no distinction between the scumbags who committed these," paraphrased, "scumbags who committed these acts and those who harbor them." The GWOT had just begun. The first front, right? Let's go into the GWOT. The first front was Afghanistan. The Taliban had been given sanctuary to Al Qaeda, scumbags, and Osama bin Laden, coward. Within weeks, U.S. forces launched Operation Enduring Freedom, OEF. That was in October 2001. We were activated to active duty. I was already active duty for the Guard. And I believe we were preparing. We had gotten word in October that we would be getting deployed. Yeah. Anyway, CIA operatives and special forces linked up with Afghan fighters, calling in U.S. airstrikes while riding on horseback through mountain passes. I think the guy who's in Thor, what's his name? Chris Hemsworth is in a movie about it. And by December, the Taliban were driven out of Kabul. But the war didn't end there. The Taliban scattered into villages and mountains. They switched from being rulers to insurgents, blending into the population, waiting to strike with ambushes, roadside bombs, suicide attacks. And what followed was 20 years of counterinsurgency. American patrolled through the valleys that looked the same day after day. Convoys dodged IEDs. Outposts holding on... outposts getting hit with constant attacks. A really good movie to watch is Restrepo. If you've never seen Restrepo, I highly recommend it. And over 2,400 U.S. service members lost their lives in Afghanistan. Tens of thousands more were wounded. And the hunt for Osama bin Laden, the coward, lasted almost a decade. And he was finally tracked down to a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. On May 2nd, 2011, U.S. Navy SEALs stormed the building and popped him in the head. Bin Laden, coward, his death was a victory, but it didn't end there. The Taliban were still there. New extremist groups were rising. And the GWOT also changed America at home, right? New security measures at airports that, the I can't even remember. I just got to get better at this. The department that handles all of that now, they're spying on you so bad. I know I didn't say tinfoil hat stuff. That's not tinfoil hat stuff. That's just fact. Anyway, the Department of Homeland Security was created. There it is. The Patriot Act, surveillance programs, and a constant low-grade fear of another 9/11. For an entire generation, the war on terror wasn't just overseas; it shaped the daily life in the United States. I remember, maybe it wasn't October when we were getting ready to get activated, because I remember working for a few months with some of my friends, man, and I remember seeing the patriotism, right? Like houses that didn't have American flags in it before had American flags in it. I mean, Toby Keith was writing anthems and stuff. We were blaring them through our trucks that had giant American flags hanging off the back. I think we ended up getting word that we were going to get deployed at the end of December, the beginning of December. I can't remember, but there was a while where patriotism was massive. I mean, 9/11 was the reason that, what's the sniper's name? The one that American Sniper was made after. I'm so horrible at this. I'm old and don't remember things, and I know there isn't a whole lot of energy in the show today. But the gentleman who was Chris Kyle, he joined because of 9/11, and he saved a lot of people's lives. Anyway, moving on. The Iraq War in 2003. The United States opened a second front in Iraq. The justification was Saddam Hussein's suspected weapons of mass destruction and connections with the extremist groups. The invasion was swift. Baghdad fell within weeks. Saddam was captured in December of 2003 and later executed in 2006. But no stockpiles of WMDs were found. At least that's what they tell us, And then came the hard part: occupation. Nation building, insurgency. Iraq descended into chaos almost immediately. Right? Fallujah became a symbol of the brutality. In April 2004, insurgents killed and manipulated 4 American contractors, dragging their bodies through the streets. I remember seeing that. The images shocked the United States and triggered the first Battle of Fallujah. The Marines moved in, but the operation was halted before the city was fully secured. Insurgents regrouped and fortified. By November 2004, the U.S. launched the second Battle of Fallujah, one of the largest urban fights since Vietnam. House to house, room by room, block by block, Marines fought through sniper fire, booby-trapped houses, constant ambushes, and brutal close-quarters combat. Whole neighborhoods were reduced to rubble. The Marines clawed the city back, but at a heavy cost. Over 100 U.S. troops were killed and more than 600 wounded in that one battle alone. Thousands of insurgents were killed. And then there's Ramadi, turned into another grinder. 4 years, soldiers and Marines fought a grinding fight, right? Like streets, every street could be an ambush, every pile of trash could be an IED. Control of the city shifted constantly. A block secured in the morning could be lost by nightfall. And it was the heart of the Al-Qaeda cowards in Iraq's operations. And it took years of counterinsurgency, new tactics, and massive sacrifices to push them back. Across Iraq, IEDs became the deadliest weapon of the insurgency. Roadside bombs, cowards tore through Humvees. My buddy Justin was hit by one. Thank God he survived. This is the great part. Justin, if I remember reading the article right, I didn't actually hear it from him. I heard about it like a few months later by reading his unit's newspaper. First thing he asked for was a cigarette. That's how I knew it was actually Justin that got hurt. And then the other thing that he did was his re-enlistment was coming up. So he went out to the site where it happened and re-enlisted right on that site. Man, dude's got bigger balls than anybody I know. Anyway, IEDs were cheap, easy to make, and devastatingly effective. Thousands of Americans were killed or maimed by IEDs. Countless more suffered life-changing injuries, amputations, burns, traumatic brain injuries, all kinds of stuff. Suicide bombings ripped through markets, mosques, and police stations, killing Iraqis and thousands, and fueling sectarian hatred. Here's the thing. Suicide bombers are the biggest cowards ever. They just are. If you want to hear, I know it might not be funny to some people, but you want to hear a really funny telling story about a suicide bomber, go read Matt Best's book, Thank You for My Service. It starts off with the world's worst terrorist. Anyway, by the time the war wound down, over 4,500 Americans had been killed in Iraq. Tens of thousands had been wounded, and hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians were dead. The country was shattered, and out of that chaos rose ISIS, a group that would terrorize the region until it was crushed a few years later. So let's shift a little bit. We got a lot to cover, so now I'm going through this a little bit quick. You can go back. You can do all your own research, check this out. But let's talk about Benghazi, September 11th, 2012. 11 years later to the day, today's the 13th year anniversary, but 11 years after 9/11, America was struck again. And not this time it was at home, but a diplomatic compound in Benghazi, Libya. After Gaddafi was overthrown in 2011, Libya fractured. Militias controlled the streets. Extremist groups thrived. Benghazi was one of the most dangerous places in the world for Americans to operate. So on the night, man, I'm sorry, I keep burping. I just drank coffee. Note to self, don't drink coffee before the show. On the night of September 11th, 2012, that danger became a reality. Around 9:40 p.m., a large force of scumbags launched an assault on the U.S. diplomatic compound. They came armed with rifles, RPGs, and mortars. The small group of American security personnel fought back but were quickly overrun. Inside the compound, Ambassador Chris Stevens, America's representative in Libya, and Information Officer Sean Smith tried to shelter in the safe room. Attackers set fires to drive them out. Smoke filled the building, and both men died of smoke inhalation before the rescuers could reach them. Stevens was the first U.S. ambassador to be killed in the line of duty since 1979. Smith, a husband and father, had served in the United States Air Force, and he was a veteran before joining the State Department. Survivors withdrew to a nearby CIA annex, and there a handful of Americans, including Navy SEALs Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty, dug in and prepared to fight through the night. Both men were contractors working security there, but their core, warriors who refused to leave. But at their core, right, these warriors refused to leave their fellow Americans undefended. Throughout the night, wave after wave of assaults came. Mortars eventually found their mark, and a round struck the annex, killing Woods and Doherty. By dawn on September 12th, the fight was over. Reinforcements had arrived, but 4 men, it was too late. And their names are worth repeating, so I'm going to say them. Ambassador Chris Stevens, Sean Smith, Tyrone Woods, and Glenn Doherty. These were not faceless casualties. Stevens had spent his career trying to build bridges in the Middle East. Smith was a tech specialist and a father of 2. Like I said before, Woods and Doherty were both Navy SEALs who had already risked everything in service and chose to keep doing it after they left the Navy. So the aftermath of Benghazi didn't end in Libya. It exploded back in Washington. And almost immediately, questions were raised. Why was security so weak at the compound? Why had requests for more resources been denied? Why did it take so long for reinforcements to arrive? Multiple investigations were launched. The State Department had an accountability review board, and it found systematic failures in leadership and deficiencies in Hillary Clinton's department. They reported that requests for additional security from the embassy in Tripoli and Benghazi compound had been repeatedly, in the months leading up to the attack, denied. They were denied and ignored. All these requests. The board concluded that certain senior officials within 2 of the bureaus of the State Department had a lack of leadership and management ability appropriate for the State Department. In plainer terms, let me just say it, red flags were raised, but the people in charge didn't act on them. Because she was Secretary of State, because Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, those failures ultimately fell under her watch. While she didn't personally approve or deny the security requests, she was the head of the department. And in Washington, that meant accountability stops with her. I mean, just in life. Come on, give me a break. The controversy didn't end there. Clinton was called to testify before Congress multiple times. In 2015, she endured 11 straight hours of questioning before the House Select Committee on Benghazi. Lawyers pressed her on her security lapses, the government's slow response, and the initial messaging that framed the attack as a protest that spiraled out of control. You just got to love those people, huh? That was something that was later shown to be inaccurate, obviously. For many Americans, the takeaway was clear. Her department had dropped the ball on security, and when it mattered most, the State Department was not ready to protect its people. She was a feckless coward. Let's just say it like it is. Sorry. She's a coward. She's a criminal. She should be in prison. The political fallout was enormous. Benghazi became a rallying cry for the critics of the Obama administration, especially for this loser Clinton, who was preparing for her presidential run. Her credibility was battered, and the phrase, "What difference at this point does it make?" from her 2013 testimony when she grew frustrated at repeated questions about the attack's origin, became infamous, seen by critics as a massive dismissal of American lives lost. Thank God she didn't become president. But strip that away, the core remains simple. A small group of Americans were surrounded by scumbags in a hostile city, and they chose to stand and fight. 4 of them gave everything. Yesterday, a gentleman named Charlie Kirk gave everything. And he was killed because people didn't like his ideology, because he didn't like his words. From the burning towers of New York to the mountains of Afghanistan, from the streets of Fallujah and Ramadi and to the compound in Benghazi, Americans have fought, bled, and died in the shadow of September 11th. These weren't just battles on a map. They were moments where ordinary men and women stood up against impossible odds and never came home. Some carried the scars for the rest of their lives. And the scars remind us that freedom is never free, and that history isn't a string of dates and places. It's a story of courage written in flesh and blood. That's what Charlie Kirk did. Courage. Remember, history isn't boring, especially when it's carried on the soldiers who gave their last full measure for the cause of freedom. See you next time.